Welcome to the Outthinker podcast. Each week, we talk with forward-looking strategists and innovators that are challenging the status quo, leading the future of business, and shaping our world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network.
The first thing you have to know is that a prediction isn't useful. What do I mean by that? If you have a prediction and you don't do anything, that serves no purpose. What predictions help is they help you make better decisions. And it's decision-making that's a big deal. So today's AI is potentially transformative. It has been transformative, will continue to be, because it helps us make better decisions.
That was Avi Goldfarb, the Rotman Chair in Artificial Intelligence and Healthcare, Professor of Marketing at Toronto's Rotman School of Management. He is also Chief Data Scientist at the Creative Destruction Lab, a Fellow at Behavioral Economics in Action at Rotman, and a faculty affiliate at the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Avi has written extensively on a broad range of topics from marketing, statistics, law, management, medicine, political science, refugee studies, among many others. As illustrated in the clip you just heard, Avi has done deep work in the study of AI and machine learning and how businesses can wield and leverage the predictive capabilities of these technologies. In this podcast, Avi draws from his research in his co-authored books, Prediction Machines, and his latest, Power and Prediction, The Disruptive Economics of Artificial Intelligence. He shares several important distinctions that are important for you to have if you want to better understand how AI will shape business strategy. We talk about point-to-point change, which we can easily get our heads around, versus the bigger, broader, systemic change that AI may introduce, which are harder to get our heads around. We talk about prediction and judgment. Until now, most of the exploration of machine learning have been around prediction. But how will things change when AI starts getting good at judgment? And broadly, he unpacks fascinating implications that machine learning and AI will have on business decision-making, economics, and competitive advantage. Ladies and gentlemen, Avi Goldfarb. Avi, thank you so much for being here with us. It's great to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So there are two questions that I always ask every guest, and they may have nothing to do with your work. Just so we can get to know you a little bit more personally, could you complete this sentence for me? If you really know me, you know that.
I like to get right to business.
I shouldn't have asked that question. Great. What is your definition of strategy?
So I'm an economist, and I'm an economist in department. So it's all about the allocation of scarce resources in order to serve a mission.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm really excited to get into your latest book, but I do want you to touch a little bit on prediction machines as well, if you don't mind. And in that, you make this economic argument of the cost of prediction coming down and what the implications would be. I was wondering if you could just walk us through that a little bit.
Of course. Thank you. So the way to think about technological change is that it's made something we used to do cheaper. You can think about the internet as making search and copying and communication cheaper. And when you think about AI, what has AI made cheaper? The reason we're talking about AI in 2023, and we weren't talking about it so much in, say, 2003, has very little to do with general artificial intelligence, like machines that can do everything we humans can do, because a very particular technology called machine learning has gotten much better. And machine learning is prediction technology. By prediction, I mean in statistical sense, taking information you have to fill in information you don't have. And so when we think about the revolution in AI that we've seen over the past decade or so, it's useful to think of it as a drop in the cost of prediction. And what happens when something gets cheap? Econ 101 says we're going to do more of it. Demand curves slope down. When the price of something falls, we do it more. So when the price of prediction falls, what's going to happen? We're going to start using machine prediction in a whole bunch of old prediction problems. So banks used to predict whether you're going to pay back a loan. Increasingly, they're using machine learning tools to predict whether you're going to pay it back. Insurance companies used to predict the likelihood of a catastrophe. And increasingly, they're using machine learning tools. They're using AI for those predictions. What's also happened is that there's some things that you might not have thought of as prediction when prediction was expensive. But when prediction is cheap enough, we can start using prediction tools, prediction machines to solve those problems. Medical diagnosis is maybe the central example here. You asked a doctor 20 years ago, are you doing prediction? They have no idea what you're talking about. But once predictions get cheap enough, it's clear that what you're doing is filling in missing information. Diagnosis prediction. Image recognition prediction. Writing, it turns out, often involves prediction. Figuring out which combination of words belong together.
Yes. And you also talk about that. Then there are also like secondary effects of that on the non-predictive activities around the prediction.
Absolutely. So going back to Econ 101, the first thing you learn is the demand curve slope downward. Prices fall, you do more. The second thing you learn is when the prices of one thing fall, that can affect demand for other things. So if coffee gets cheap, we're going to start buying more coffee. What does that also mean? It means we're also going to buy more cream and sugar because cream and sugar are the complements to coffee. So what we want to think through is what are the complements to prediction? What gets more valuable as machine prediction gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper? And to understand that, the first thing you have to know is that a prediction isn't useful. What I mean by that, if you have a prediction and you don't do anything, it serves no purpose. What predictions help is they help you make better decisions. And it's decision-making that's a big deal. So today's AI is potentially transformative. It has been transformative continually because it helps us make better decisions.
Interesting. So you're distinguishing machine learning from AI and saying that AI can also help with the secondary step of decision-making after the prediction. Am I describing that right?
I wasn't doing that, but I could have been.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry.
Right now, I'm using AI as a synonym for machine learning. And then we can say, okay, so what becomes more valuable? The other aspects of decision-making, which is the data that goes into building the predictions, the action that you take as a consequence of whatever decision you're making, and the judgment about what to do with those predictions. So judgment is really fundamental. At a high level, knowing which predictions to make and what to do with those predictions once you have them. There's a formal definition as well, which is about utility and payoffs. But thinking it through, what it really is, the machine's provided the prediction, and the human is saying, hey, which predictions should we be making? And now that we have a prediction of what's likely to happen, what should we do? That's judgment. And that becomes much, much more valuable.
Got it. Yes, I understand. We spoke with Professor Tom Malone at MIT, and he described it, this is many years ago. He wasn't making the distinction between machine and AI yet, but first, a machine will predict what the diagnosis will be, and the doctor will say, yeah, that seems right, let me check. And then they will say, make a suggestion, so we think we should do this, and the doctor will still choose. But eventually, as the doctor hits the green button over and over and over again, eventually the machine will stop asking, or the doctor will stop judging.
Absolutely. So machines can learn to predict judgment, reframing judgment as a prediction problem. And what that does is it doesn't mean that judgment goes away, it's just kind of moving it up the chain, because then some human has to say, what judgment should the machine predict? If the doctor just says, yes, 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 is that good enough? Or do we actually need ground truth from pathology about what should be done? There's a limit based on the frequency that certain decisions are made on how much the machines are going to be able to do judgment.
You mentioned the word frequency in which decisions are made. Can you just explain that? I hadn't read or thought about that.
Of course. So today's AI, today's prediction machines make these predictions based on data. And so what they're particularly good at is using massive amounts of data in order to figure out the relevant signal and then fill in missing information. So where are they going to break down? They're going to break down in places where you don't have data. For things that are very rare, AIs won't work that well because, if something happens every 4 years and the world changes every 4 years, then you have one observation every 4 years and it's the only relevant observation, so your machines aren't going to be that good. There's a whole bunch of other places where you're not going to have the relevant data, and there's going to be real challenges in using prediction machines in order to help you.
Okay. I know we're veering off the topic a little bit, but is there the other extreme where decisions need to be made super rapidly that humans can't make the decisions or make the judgments quickly enough? I'm thinking like algorithmic trading and things like that.
Yeah, but if you're going to do something like that, you need really good guardrails in place, or the stakes need to be really low. So, hey, the stakes are low, who cares? The machine makes a mistake, who cares? If the stakes are high, just saying, okay, we're going to delegate to a machine, things get complicated. So for example, we hear about this in algorithmic trading, and you hear about it in a military context as well. Okay, the world is getting faster, so we need to automate these things because humans can't react that fast. The problem is in both those situations, there's an adversary. And the adversary is trying to mess with you, potentially. And they can feed you bad data, try to mess with your judgment. And in the process, they could take advantage of the weaknesses that are inherent in prediction machines because they don't predict well off the support of the data they have and generate disaster. And so we have to be very careful about putting the right guardrails in place if we're going to make things happen fast.
I think we kind of like establish some of the fundamentals. And what I really like about your work is that you talk about what you call the point-to-point solutions and then the systemic change. If you don't mind me leading you, you use a great analogy of that with electrification. Could you describe that? And then we could talk about what the systemic changes might be.
Absolutely. So Edison's patent for the electric light bulb was filed in 1880. Its demonstration was 1879. Anybody paying attention in the 1880s, it was clear that electricity was going to be a big deal. Lots of people were writing about the various ways that electricity was going to transform the way we lived and the way we worked. But it wasn't until the 1920s that half of US households and half of US factories were electrified. It took 40 years from recognizing the potential of the technology to affecting half of people at home and at work. What took so long? Well, in the early days, what was happening is they were taking out their old process and dropping in a new one. So, for example, a factory of the 1880s would have likely been powered by a steam engine, and the whole factory was organized around the power needs of the various machines. So you'd have the most power-hungry machines as close as possible to the steam engine because energy dissipates with distance, and you'd have the least power-hungry machines farther away. And so the workflow within the factory wasn't determined by the logic of production per se. It was determined by the logic of the energy needs. And so you had things going up and down and back and forth around the factory. As part of that process, therefore, you didn't move things as much. You tried to do as much in one place as possible. When they started electrifying factories, what they did was take out that steam engine, drop in an electric motor, and keep the workflow exactly the same. For those factories that adopted, it might have saved 5 or 10%, maybe more, on energy costs. But it didn't really transform much of the way the factory worked. And for most entrepreneurs and most factory owners, it wasn't worth the bother to take out the steam engine, put in the electric motor, figuring out the way to get electricity into the factory, etc., when it was just about saving a little bit on energy. What started to happen around 1900 is people realized that electricity wasn't just cheap power, but it allowed you to decouple the power source for the machines. It allowed for a reorganization of the factory.
Because proximity to the power source was no longer a factor or as important a factor. I got it.
Exactly. And so when proximity to the power source was no longer a factor, we could reinvent what a factory looked like. So the modern, or at least the 20th century factory that you might imagine with inputs coming in one end and outputs coming out the other as part of a modular production process, that was an invention. That was a recognition of what electricity could do. And that new kind of factory, that's what we call a system solution, totally reinventing the way the factory worked. Once we saw how effective that was, then lots of factory owners, lots of entrepreneurs, lots of managers started building their factories that way. And that led to an acceleration of electricity adoption until finally most factories adopted. A similar thing was happening in houses in terms of replacing candles with light bulbs versus thinking through a different way to use indoor space because of electrification.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's hard for most humans, me, to think around the corner and think about this system's implications, which you do in both your books. I'll talk a little bit about the power and prediction, where I think you dig even further into that. How does technology change power?
Right. So we talked about prediction and judgment already. What AI does is it decouples the prediction from the judgment. So right now, when you make a decision, in your head, you're combining prediction and judgment, and then you're making some decision. What AI does is it gives you the prediction. This is the likelihood that this will happen versus that will happen. Doesn't give you the judgment, but now you need to provide the judgment. So what AI does is it decouples the prediction from the judgment. That creates opportunities. It also creates challenges on power. So challenge number one is maybe the people who are good at doing prediction and judgment together aren't the same people who are going to be good at doing judgment in the presence of prediction. In medicine, doctors are good at prediction and judgment together, but maybe that training, if the machine's provided the prediction, is a different set of people who will be good at helping people navigate the stress of the healthcare system. In HR, the HR manager might be very good at predicting who's going to succeed and judging what the definition of success really is. But if the machine's providing a prediction, maybe there's someone else in the organization that's really about defining what a good fit employee looks like for that company. That's going to change the way power operates within the company.
I might be understanding this wrong, but I could say I might be a good judge of character. I don't think I really am necessarily, but just hypothetically, I might just sense and might feel like intuition, this person would be a good fit. But if a machine said, you've got Frank, Jane, and Pat, and there is a 33% chance and a 22% and a 50% chance, then that would take a different type of thought process to do the judgment, to think through each of the pros and cons of each, something like that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Two parts. So part one is exactly what you described. So how do we think about 50 versus 33 versus 12? What do those really mean? We'll dig into that in a second. Then the other version is, what does success even mean? You have some intuition about what a successful employee might look like, but you have to figure out for the machine, like how to quantify that. How do we define success in order for it to be able to predict those 50, 33, and 12 or whatever? Going a step beyond that is then you got to think through, when you say 50% chance of success, how successful do you really mean? So some organizations might primarily want to hire people who have a chance at being the top performers. The focus is going to be getting anybody who might be in the right tail of extremely, extremely effective employees. They're willing to take some risks on bad employees in order to have a chance at a superstar. Other organizations might not really care about the superstars. They just want you to perform your job day by day. In that situation, having bad employees is a really big deal, but they don't care about the superstar. And so thinking through the distribution of possibilities, that's again a human judgment The AI might be able to provide the prediction of what that distribution looks like. But you, as the person providing judgment, figuring out which prediction should you make and what should you do with it once you have it, provide an understanding and nuance of who is it that you really want.
Could you give us an example? It doesn't have to be about what we're talking about now, about selecting employees.
Here's an example of a prediction with potential to be transmitted. So I don't remember a few years ago, there was this water crisis in Flint, Michigan. They had discovered massive amounts of lead in the water, and lead is a deadly neurotoxin. You do not want it in your water. And so the city set about replacing those lead pipes. The problem was only about 20% of the pipes in the city had lead in them, and they didn't know which 20%. And every time you try to discover if there's lead pipes, it costs hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Then once you've figured out that there's lead there, it's actually pretty easy because you've already dug the hole to replace the lead with copper pipes, or at least pipes that don't contain lead. So the cost is really in discovering which pipes had lead. These two professors at the University of Michigan built an AI to predict which pipes in the city had lead. And the AI was really good. Instead of 20%, they were 80% accurate. Every 5 times they dug, they found lead 4 times. And the city started using it, and it worked, and it was great. But then a whole bunch of people in the city started to wonder why their pipes weren't getting dug up. It's frightening to think that you might have lead in your pipes and you don't know. So they started complaining and saying, how come the people the next street over, they're getting their pipes dug up, but I'm not getting my pipes dug up? Or how people in that ward, they're getting their pipes dug up, but hey, city councilor, I'm in your ward and my pipes aren't getting dug up. I don't know if I have lead or not. The politicians started listening and they said, you know what? Why are we listening to these professors' algorithm? That's not fair. What would be fair is to go systematically, street by street, house by house in Flint, Michigan, digging up everybody to see if they had lead pipes. And they did that. And it went from 80% accurate all the way down to 20. They stopped using their algorithm. It went to the base rate. And this seemed like a massive fail for AI. There was an article in The Atlantic that talked about this as a feel-good story for AI gone wrong. But the story didn't actually end there because it's pretty clear what happened was the wrong call. Pretty clear that a life is a life. Nobody should be drinking toxic water. And so some people in the city sued and a judge said, you know what? The right call is to listen to these professors' algorithm. 80% chance of finding lead is better than a 20% chance of finding lead. And every house and every life is equally valuable. And so the story ended up flipping right back around. The politicians lost their power, effectively, to judge whose pipe should get dug up. And the people, or the judge, depends on how you view this, gain power in terms of determining whose pipes got dug up. The AI made it very clear what the right judgment was. Because when the prediction and the judgment were bundled, it wasn't clear, should you do this house? Should you do that house? Who knows? So the politicians got to decide on presumably the houses that were politically most expedient. But once the prediction and the judgment got separated, then it was clear what the right judgment was.
Interesting. Wow, I've got so many more questions, but I know we're reaching the top of our time with you. So Avi, my mind is buzzing with the implications, and I don't know whether to be scared or not. What do you think? Should we worry?
It depends on your industry, and it depends on the extent to which you think you're actually serving your customers well. What do I mean by that? Think about the mission of your company and think about how much of what you do is about serving that mission and how much of what you do, your standard operating procedures, are about the fact that you fail to serve on that mission. Let me give you an example. Think about airports. Seoul, Incheon, Singapore. These are the airports that are often voted the best airports in the world. They are multi-billion-dollar structures. They have great shopping, great restaurants, might have museums and theaters. They're pretty spectacular. But if you look at how the super rich fly, they don't fly through multi-billion-dollar structures. They fly through sheds. I've been told that if you look at the airport terminal at private airports, there's nothing there. There's a shed with maybe a magazine rack and a coffee pot. And that's it. So how come those of us who fly and don't have that much money fly in these multi-billion-dollar structures, and the people who get the ultimate experience in flying don't have any of that and they fly through a shed? And the reason is because no one wants to spend time at an airport. The reason we need that multi-billion-dollar architecture is because that industry fails to deliver on their mission. So Seoul Incheon, often voted the best airport in the world, their mission is to ensure smooth air transportation. And almost everything they do is about compensating for the fact that they don't ensure smooth air transportation. It's about the fact that, well, we don't know how long it's going to take you to get to the airport, through security into your gate, and the flight might be late, so we're going to make you comfortable while you're there. That's a failure. With better prediction, you can imagine an entirely new kind of airport where we all fly like the super rich, where we get to the airport, we walk on the plane, and we don't have to worry about anything. Industry by industry, you can go through this, all the things that you do and think through what are the ways that you fail. And that's where the opportunity lies.
Right. We could systematically go through industry by industry, function by function, or maybe we could build an algorithm that could allow us to better predict where those might be Thank you so much for spending the time here. I know that we've only really scratched the surface of your work and that you're continuing to push forward our knowledge. Where can people continue to learn from you and connect with you?
So there's my book, new book, Power Prediction. That's a good place.
Absolutely. Highly recommend it.
And I tend to be giving lots of talks and on tour. Come see me.
Find a lot on YouTube. Great content there. So I encourage people to look there as well.
Absolutely.
All right, Avi, thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you to our guest. Thank you to our producers, Karina Reyes and Zach Nest, our editor, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kaihan Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week with another episode of Outthinkers.